Put yourself in position to win big on Kentucky Derby Day with the power of daily racing form. Visit shop.drf.com and get past performances, expert picks, betting strategies, clock reports, and more. Again, that's shop.drf.com.
It's one of those weeks that we all look forward to. Kentucky Oaks and Kentucky Derby week is upon us. We're going to take a look here at a stakes preview for the Kentucky Oaks, a field of 14 in the main body, a couple of also eligibles as well. Wonder Wheel, who we know is sensational as a 2-year-old, she's going to make an appearance in the Oaks. Botanical and Wet Paint have had tremendous seasons, but they're both a bit different. One with a lot of experience on the dirt, one trying the dirt for the first time. A couple of outsiders in here as well. Dorth Vader ran very well at Gulfstream Park during the championship meet. Affirmative Lady was a maiden until about 2 starts back and then was able to come back after the maiden victory to win a graded stake. Pretty Mischievous was second in her most recent outing. It's just a great field. As I mentioned, 14, but there are also a few also eligibles in the event of a defection in here. Taxed, Julia Shining, and Hoosier Philly, and the latter of the two are horses that were talked about very early in 2023, but they did not make the main body as of now. So let's dive into this. There's a lot to get to. Going to try to speed it along here. We'll start with the number 1, Mimi Makukugushi. This is a horse that most recently won the UAE Oaks. Pretty impressive fashion. And stretched out in her last 3 starts from 7 furlongs to a mile and 3/16. And she's really relished the added distance and has performed well. So she's actually going to take a cut back in distance, which is not necessarily what everyone in the field is going to do, but she's going to make her first start in the United States. The number 2, the Alley's Look. This one's out of Brad Cox barn, was 3rd in the Fairground Oaks in her most recent outing. We know that was won by South Lawn, and she's also going to have to face Pretty Mischievous again, who draws the outside in the Kentucky Oaks. You look at her form before that. Besides her first 2 career starts, she's kind of been there every step of the way. She's gotten some good trips towards the front of the pack. She's had other efforts where she's been able to close from towards the back of the pack in terms of the pace scenario in here and where she could be early on. I think she's going to be kind of maybe mid-pack or maybe a little bit even more forwardly placed than that. She's got a slew of works at Churchill, but she's just going to make that second start since January. So I looked in a different direction, but we all know Brad Cox has several in here and has done really great work throughout his career, especially this year. The number 3, Gambling Girls, who will go to next. This one trained by Todd Pletcher. We're actually going to take a look at her most recent effort at Aqueduct in the Grade 3 Gazelle. When you look at this field in here, there's 2 horses to point out. Gambling Girls, the number 2, and the number 4 at 26-1. That's Promise Her America, who's also in this year's edition of the Kentucky Oaks. And you can see at this point, Promise Her America has been on the front end for a little bit and is able to kind of just get a jump on Gambling Girl, who had a really nice late kick in this race, really hit her stride in those late stages best. And it's not surprising to see that from her, knowing her running style. If you go down the page, she's typically not in a hurry early on, but she's been able to make up a lot of ground. 2 starts back, she was able to get over the sloppy track for a second time in her career. And a big thing that a lot of people have been talking this week in the lead up to the Kentucky Derby is what's the weather going to be like? I know there is rain as expected. That certainly could change the complexion of this race, but I think Gambling Girl through and through, looking from a pedigree standpoint and just looking at her races, she's going to be hoping for a contested pace early on because she does do her best running late. And notice Red Ortiz Jr. is booked to ride. This one's 15-1 on the morning line. The number 4, South Lawn. It's a name that I've already dropped. She has been sensational in her last 2 efforts. She got a really nice win to kick off her 3-year-old season by 8 lengths with Raylu Gutierrez, who was aboard her for the first time, got back aboard her in the Fairground Oaks. She was able to circle the field. In terms of the pace certainly set up for her. It was a bit quicker than she had seen in her prior effort, but I liked the versatility that she had shown. In her prior start, she was really forwardly placed early on and was simply much the best, but she did face tougher competition in that Grade 2 effort, and she looked tremendous in the flesh as well. She's been working out very well at Churchill. You can see a bullet drill on April 20th, and Norm Cassie has had a tremendous year, striking at over 25% and has done a tremendous job with this filly. The number 5, Wonder Wheels, who we'll take a look at next, 3-year-old daughter of Into Mischief, who really shined as a 2-year-old. You look at her wins or even her runner-up finish in the Spinaway, a win in the Alcibiades, and then she capped her 2-year-old season with a win in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, and we're going to take a look at that race. Just looking at her run style, this is not the trip that we necessarily seen from her before. she was far back. We're just looking at the stretch run in here, but she's able to, make up some ground here. She's hitting her best stride. The other two that were in front of her at this point, they're tiring a bit, especially the horse on the rail, and she just blows by. The horse is going to end up finishing right behind her in here, and she looked great striding towards the wire. But you look at her so far as a 3-year-old, and it just hasn't panned out. Now, we only have seen her twice. She raced pretty well on the Suncoast. She was heavily favored in that effort, but maybe she needed a race. And more recently in the Ashland, seeing how well she had performed at Keeneland before, it was certainly a disappointment, and I'm sure the connections were disappointed as well. But it is Mark Cassie. I wonder if third start off the layoff, she could show improvement. A new rider, they're going to climb aboard her for the first time, and that is Joelle Rosario. The number 6, Botanical, has been very impressive in her 4 wins, but they've all been at Turfway Park. So that makes her a bit of a wild card in here. She's got very nice Beyer speed figures in her last 2 efforts, a 90 and 2 back, a 91 open length wins. I do want to point out the one thing I do really like about her is that effort in the Cincinnati Trophy. She did not have the lead, where in her other efforts she was forwardly placed and able to kind of just draw away from the field early on. But I really thought the effort to look at was the 1-2 back. Just knowing what the pace scenario could be in this race, versatility is certainly not a bad thing to have on Kentucky Oaks Day, and I thought she raced very well in the Cincinnati Trophy. Another one here trained by Brad Cox, and he'll also send out the filly to her outside, the number 7, Wet Paint, who's 5-2, that morning line favorite. She's also won several races in a row now. She's won her last 3, all at Oaklawn Park, but things to note, she's picked up different surfaces in each of those, and she's a true closer as well. Now, she has been forwardly placed. You got to go down the page. That was at Turfway Park, but in her dirt races, she's been closing from off of it and somehow has been able to carve out trips. And we're going to take a look at her most recent effort in the Grade 3 Fantasy back on April 1st. You're looking at 2 horses in here specifically. She's the 6th. The number 4 is Taxed, who is in the also eligibles for the Kentucky Oaks. And just looking at what Payne is able to angle out and stride clear and basically puts this field away. The battle is going to be for second here. Tax is able to really hit her best stride late to pick up that second place finish. But Wet Paint looked very impressive. You can watch the entire replay and you can just see somehow she's always able to work out this trip from off the pace. And that's not necessarily easy to do. And then she's doing it in impressive fashion. So Wet Paint is certainly one to watch in the Oaks. The number 8, Promise Her America. Now, we took a look earlier at the Grade 3 Gazelle and her performance, and this is a huge step up. Prior to that, she had just broken her maiden against maiden special weight competition in her 3rd career start at a mile. She stretched out to a mile and an eighth and forwardly placed in fractions that were pretty soft. They were certainly softer than what she'd saw in her maiden victory. They went 49 and 3 for that opening half. And the concern I would have with her is she raced very well. She was, she really got the job done, and she proved herself and, got herself into this race. But in terms of the pace scenario, I think she's going to have to learn, a little bit how to rate, and she's probably going to have to work out a trip. I just don't think she's fast enough to be forwardly placed. And even listening to some interviews this week, there's a bunch of great content out there. Ray Handel had kind of mentioned the same thing, that she's just probably not as quick as other fillies in the field. The number 9, And Tell Me No Lies, this one out of the Peter Miller barn, was second last time out in the Grade 2 Santa Anita Oaks. And the big thing is, look who she had to face in those 2 efforts. Faiza, who we're not going to see Faiza in this race. She's getting also out of California just for the 2nd time in her career. Now, she did race in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. She finished 8th behind Wonder Wheel back in November. I still think she's going to need to improve in general. You look at her races, and in my opinion, in her last 2, she's needed more in those late stages, and she's been a tad flat. So this is a big stage to kind of ask that out of a filly. And, she was one for me. I looked at maybe as an exotics possibility, but I just couldn't endorse her too high up in the spot. The number 10, Flying Connection. This is the Sunland Park Invader, who's won her last 2 in very impressive fashion and has rattled off some quick opening quarters and opening half miles in those races. I do think there is a situation where Flying Connection can certainly be involved early in the spot. Florent Giroux has the call. Todd Fincher is the trainer, who's done a lot of great work in the Kentucky Oaks. I'm sure they're excited to be in this spot, but I do think this is a huge test for Clash. She's never been in a graded stake, and I'm not sure in terms of what she has faced out at Sunland Park. It's just not this same level when you kind of look at some of these other fillies that have been either out in California or have been out on the East Coast. Now, the number 11 Defining Purpose, this one out of the Kenny McPeak Farm, was the winner of the Ashland. And this is a horse that really stepped it up. She was 20-1 in the race. Prior to that, in the Honeybee, she didn't fare too well. She also just did not get kind of the trip that I think she wants. I think she wants to be pretty close to the pace, or at least have a couple of horses in front of her as a target. And she just was not, engaged in the Honeybee. But in the Ashland, she was really close to that pace. Ended up winning it by half a length. I think she's going to be a horse that, in terms of her kind of odds on the tote board, I'm curious to see the action that she'll take. I think she could be sneaky in the spot, and she's one that's been also training well, has a bullet drill on April 29th locally at Churchill Downs. We're kind of wrapping up the field. A couple more to get to. The number 12, Dorth Vader. This is the Florida shipper. This one trained by Michael Yates, a John Ropes homebred who really shocked everyone in the Grade 2 Devona Dale. She's going a mile for the first time, or at least a similar distance in quite some time. She had a couple efforts at 6 furlongs and 7 furlongs. And she looked very good. She got an 81 Beyer speed figure in the Devona Dale. She won by nearly 5 lengths at odds of 46-1. Her next start was the Grade 2 Gulfstream Park Oaks. She took a lot more respect. She was 4-1, and she did hit the lead late, but she surrendered. She was only 4th best. Affirmative Lady, who draws to her outside in this spot, was able to get the job done. But I still thought she ran really well in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. It was her first time since the Florida Sire Stakes that she had gone a mile and a 16th, and I wonder if the effort 2 back might have taken a little bit out of her. And now you can see she does have a couple of workouts too, specifically at Gulfstream Park in preparation for the Oaks. And note the rider, Luis Saez, always one to watch. He had a really great meet at Keeneland. He's so far at Churchill off to a really hot start. So they certainly have the hot hands of Luis Saez to help guide Dorth Vader in the Oaks. There's 13, Affirmative Lady. Mentioned this when we looked at the entry card. This is an interesting horse. She just broke her maiden 2 starts ago, but look at her prior efforts. To see Graham Motion put this horse in a Grade 2 event in another stakes race where she was, picking up pieces in there, I think it says a lot about her. And we'll take a look at her most recent win, where she's able to get the job done. The 8 is Dorth Vader. You can see Affirmative Lady is the number 4. Dorth Vader here is going to get that lead just for a moment, but Affirmative Lady really is able to gear down here in the stretch and does hit her best strides late to get up. And she ends up being much the best in here. She wins by 2 lengths. And as I was talking to you about moments before, I just think Graham Motion doesn't necessarily put maidens in stakes races. It's not something that we see from him. So to me, that means that Graham thinks that this filly has a lot of talent. And she's been able to show that in her last 2 as she's won both of them. John Velasquez piloted her earlier on in her career and is going to reunite with her for the first time since December. And then rounding out the body of the field, the main body, I should say, is the 14, Pretty Mischievous, who was most recently 2nd in the Grade 2 Fairground Oaks. Before that, she had won the Rachel Alexandra. And looking at her, she's been kind of the ideal model in terms of consistency. She's been very good in all of her starts. I think she's tactical. Now, she does draw outside here, which is somewhat to her benefit, knowing that she's got some early foot, but it is very far to the outside with having post 14. Just an interesting thing to note as well, blinkers on for her, and she already has that speed, but I think it's more of a focus thing. I think maybe in the Fairgrounds Oaks, she did lose her focus a little bit in the stretch. So I think this is hopefully an equipment change that's going to just make her a little bit sharper come this Friday. But that is the field of 14 here for the Kentucky Oaks. I think there's certainly many directions one could go. And I'm going to go with a horse that maybe not in terms of price is a wild card, but the big question here is going to be, can this horse handle the dirt? That's the number 6 Botanical, who has won her last 4 efforts, but they've all been at Turfway Park on their synthetic surface. She's won them very impressively. For me, I just think looking at her pedigree, she is by Medaglia d'Oro out of a Blame mare. I don't think the dirt's going to be an issue. Her workouts suggest that they shouldn't be, and Brad Cox obviously has done very good work, I should say, with his 3-year-old. So I want her 4-1 on the morning line. I've been a fan of the 13 Affirmative Lady in her last several efforts, and I thought she looked pretty good in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. The number 7 Wet Paint is illogical. She's really hard to knock. I mean, she is going to have to, again, weave through horses in front of her and potentially traffic, but she's done that time and time again. And the 14 will round out my top 4. That's Pretty Mischievous. I'm curious to see what the equipment change will do for her come this Friday. But I'm all in on the number 6 Wet Paint in this year's edition of the Kentucky Oaks. Good luck.